I've been trying to reconnect with coding, not as a job, as a way to be creative. So I decided to create a violin practice app. I thought that Claude AI would speed up this process. I was wrong. Using AI to program is not as straightforward as you'd think. I crafted an incredibly detailed prompt for Claude AI. The problem, it took me close to 3 days to get a functioning web app, and it didn't even have all the features that I originally envisioned. The silver lining is this experience did teach me how to be the most effective and efficient when using AI to program, and watching this video should save you all the time that I wasted. So without further ado, let's jump right in. A lot of the time, Claude AI missed key dependencies and I'd have to spend hours troubleshooting what went wrong. Imagine being handed IKEA furniture, but the screws are missing. I realized pretty quickly that the code that it was generating was very boilerplate, and without context or any programming knowledge or familiarity with the tech stack, it wasn't really helpful. Another issue was that Claude AI remembered context pretty well within the same chat, but the longer the chat session went on, the more questions I asked, the more code I asked it to produce, the more debugging I asked it to do, the quicker you hit your usage limits. The only way to combat this is to constantly start new chats, but the problem with that is it's kind of like losing a map in the middle of a hike. So when you start a new chat, you cannot transfer the context over. You have to re-upload files, re-explain what was going on, basically start from scratch. So it feels like you're constantly backtracking and it can cause you to lose momentum. Some of the code that it generates is questionable. So for example, in Java, there are certain paradigms, or just in programming in general, there are paradigms that you follow to make sure that you have a maintainable, scalable app. And Claude AI can generate code that works, but it might not be code that's good. Imagine it writing a database call in your controller class, something that at the surface level doesn't really look like a huge issue, but in the future could become a mess. And if you're unfamiliar with the language or the tech stack, the framework, the problem is that you will take the suggestion just because it works, but then you end up with an app that's hard to maintain and just stylistically is a nightmare. There's this myth going around that you can create an app with AI and you don't need to know how to code, you don't need to know software engineering principles, you don't need to know any of it. And that is completely false. I mean, sure, you can definitely create a single feature tool that you run locally and maybe you have the guts to deploy to the public. But if you're trying to create something that is scalable, maintainable, and a full functioning, full featured application, you will need to know how to code. You're gonna have to understand what you're building. I mean, even if you do know how to code and you're working with a tech stack that you're unfamiliar with, there's still gonna be a pretty steep learning curve, even if you're using AI. The only difference is that instead of spending hours searching Stack Overflow and Googling questions, ChatGPT or Claude AI can generate that boilerplate code for you up front. But once you have that boilerplate code, you still need to understand how to debug it, how to adapt it to your use case, and ultimately how to make sense of what you're working with. So AI definitely isn't a magic wand to spin up fully functioning web applications or applications. However, if you use it properly, you can take the benefits and it can save you a lot of time and allow you to focus on the fun parts, the creative parts. Here are the main things that I learned that helped me use Claude AI more efficiently and effectively. Quick interruption, my name is Sophie and I go by Code by Sophie on all social platforms. I create tech content with the goal of making tech accessible. So if you support this mission, make sure you like and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get into the rest of the video. Focus on single features. Instead of asking Claude AI to build an entire functioning application, ask it to build one feature at a time, debug each feature at a time, adapt each feature at a time. Doing it this way makes it easier to start new chats when you are getting close to hitting your usage limits because of the long chats. Try not to get to the point where your chats are extremely long. And if you do hit your usage limits, remember that you can use older Claude AI versions. In addition, you can always use ChatGPT. You can take what you've built so far with Claude AI and then dump those files into ChatGPT. This isn't my favorite option, but it is a option nonetheless. It's easier to build this way over days. For example, you can do a feature a day. It's like when you're building with Legos, right? You do one section at a time. When you're tired, you you can take a break, but you always leave it at a good stopping point. If you can, stick to familiar tech stacks. When you already know the framework or the language, it becomes a lot easier to use AI. AI becomes a powerful tool that accelerates your programming process. Why? Because you're able to debug, adapt, and ask it for what you want and understand pretty quickly whether or not what it's suggesting to you is correct or if it's wrong. When you aren't familiar with the tech stack, it can take a lot longer to get to the point where you have something that's fully functioning. And even if you do, there could still be some question marks because you're not familiar with it and you aren't fully sure if it's a manageable or good practice application. Overall, Claude AI is not replacing developers anytime soon, but I do think that it's very powerful to speed up the regular development process if you already know how to program. I think the magic is when you combine your own expertise with AI. If you're interested in seeing how I use this process to create the violin app, make sure you check out this video and I will catch you guys in the next one.